Before we dive into tonight's story, if you enjoy these dark tales and want to keep the chills coming every night, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss a moment. I've got more spine-tingling stories just for you, waiting to haunt your dreams. It was a warm July morning in 2020 when 17-year-old Bernadette Walker got into a car with the man she grew up calling Dad. She wore her favorite denim jacket, black clothes, and her thick framed glasses, but something felt off. Her phone had been taken away, and she looked worried. The man driving her wasn't just a family member. Sure, he was someone who had been a big part of her life for years, but that car ride would be the last time anyone ever saw Bernadette. When he returned home later that day, Bernadette wasn't with him, and strangely, her own mother didn't report her missing for 3 whole days. What happened during that ride? And why did no one seem in a hurry to find her? Bernadette Walker was born on December 13, 2002, in Peterborough, England. Known affectionately as Bea by those closest to her, Bernadette had a quiet demeanor around strangers. But within her inner circle, she was vibrant, cheerful, and full of life. She had a deep love for the arts, especially photography. Her camera was her constant companion, and it made perfect sense when she decided to study photography at Peterborough College after finishing high school. Bea had big dreams. She hoped to leave her hometown someday and build a new life in the United States. Like many teenagers, she enjoyed spending time online, using social media to connect with friends in ways that felt more comfortable than face-to-face interaction. She also had a soft spot for knitting, a craft lovingly passed down to her by her grandmother. Their bond was special, and Bea remained close to her entire family. Bea's early life wasn't without complications. After her birth, her mother, Sarah Louise, separated from Bea's biological father under circumstances that remain unclear. Eventually, Sarah moved into a new home in 2006 with her 5 children, while pregnant with her 6th. That's when she met Scott Walker, their next-door neighbor. At the time, Scott was married to a woman named Jill. The two had met in 2004 when Jill was a single mom raising 2 teenage boys. Their relationship escalated quickly. Scott moved in just 2 months after they started dating. But soon after, Jill noticed drastic changes in him. He became controlling and paranoid, constantly accusing her of cheating. Though he never physically assaulted her, Jill recalled terrifying threats during arguments. His words left emotional scars. Despite the red flags, Jill remained in the relationship. She eventually agreed to marry Scott, not because she wanted to, but because she felt trapped. Their marriage, which began in 2005, only magnified Scott's controlling nature. He offered no love or respect, just demands. When Scott turned his attention to Sarah, Jill wasn't devastated. In fact, she saw it as an escape. Watching Scott flirt with Sarah gave her a glimmer of hope. With a friend's help, Jill packed her belongings, left Scott, and even took legal action to keep him away. Scott wasted no time diving into a new relationship with Sarah. Bea, still a little girl, began to see Scott as a father figure, calling him Dad, a tragic detail given what would unfold later. Though Sarah and Scott never married, she legally changed her surname and her children's to Walker, signaling her commitment to their new life together. The couple went on to have 4 more children. That brought the total number of kids in their 5-bedroom home to 10. With so many personalities under one roof, things were naturally chaotic. Sarah worked in elderly care, while Scott jumped from job to job. He spent plenty of time online, though, crafting a self-image on social media that didn't match the reality of their home life. Behind closed doors, things were far from okay. Toxicity brewed within the household. One of the children, Anthony, later revealed that Scott was both verbally and physically abusive to the entire family. He also claimed that Scott repeatedly cheated on Sarah, engaging in multiple affairs. Perhaps the most disturbing allegation, Scott had installed surveillance cameras in every room, including the bathroom. He claimed it was to catch Bea hiding candy wrappers in toilet rolls. But the implications of such surveillance in a home with 10 children are deeply unsettling. By July 2020, tensions in the Walker household had reached a boiling point. Scott was 50 years old. Sarah, then 37, had just given birth to another baby girl the previous month. Meanwhile, B was 17 on the brink of adulthood, still holding on to her dreams, unaware of just how dark things were about to get. Eventually, Sarah had enough. Years of manipulation and emotional chaos at the hands of Scott Walker pushed her to a breaking point. The relationship was over, and Sarah had moved on. She was now dating a new man named Chris O'Connell. But even though their romantic relationship had ended, Scott remained in the family home. Despite no longer being a couple, Scott took it upon himself to create rules for Sarah regarding her new relationship. He told her she could only stay over at Chris' place 2 nights a week. And Chris, he wasn't allowed anywhere near the Walker home. Now it might make sense to set some boundaries when you're co-parenting under one roof. But Scott was no longer Sarah's partner, just a roommate at best, yet he was still trying to control her life. Then came July 17th, 2020, around 10 p.m. Scott took Bernadette, B, to his parents' house. She wore black clothes, a blue denim jacket, and her signature thick black framed glasses. On the way there, Scott took her phone away. Why he did this, no one knows for sure. But his parents noted that when B arrived, she seemed deeply upset. She went to bed sometime around 1 a.m. The next morning, July 18th, at about 10:25 a.m., Scott returned to pick her up, but B never made it home. Scott later claimed that during the drive, he stopped near a place called Skater's Way to have a cigarette. According to him, B suddenly opened the car door and ran off. He said he tried to chase her but couldn't keep up, so he gave up and drove back home. When Scott arrived back at the house, Sarah noticed something odd. He looked drained and on the edge of tears, but she didn't ask questions. At that point, she didn't care much about his emotional state. Still, what happened next was shocking. B wasn't reported missing until 3 days later. 3 days. Sarah knew B hadn't returned home with Scott, and yet she said nothing. Most parents would call the police immediately if their child disappeared, but not Sarah. The delay raises painful questions. Why wait so long? What happened in those 72 hours? As investigators would later uncover, the truth was more horrifying than anyone could imagine. B had been living a silent nightmare. Behind closed doors, she was enduring years of unimaginable abuse. The person responsible, Scott Walker, the man she had once called Dad. The abuse spanned nearly 7 years, but B did try to speak up. She found the courage to confide in her mother. She told Sarah the truth about what Scott had been doing, and Sarah didn't believe her. She called her daughter a liar. This was a man with a known history of violence, of infidelity, of manipulative behavior. A man who had already been abusive in previous relationships. And yet, when her daughter came forward with her truth, Sarah turned her back on her. As if that betrayal weren't enough, Sarah ended their conversation with a threat, telling B she'd killed her if she ever spoke about it again. Instead of protecting her child, Sarah chose to defend the man she was already planning to leave. She stood by an abuser and silenced her daughter. B had no one, no protector, no safe place. She had reached out in desperation and been met with cruelty from the one person who should have been her shield. It's heartbreaking, it's infuriating, and it's a reminder that sometimes the people who are supposed to care the most can end up causing the deepest harm. Parenthood is supposed to be about protecting your child at all costs. But in this case, that role was abandoned in the worst way imaginable, when Sarah finally picked up the phone to report her daughter missing. 3 days after B supposedly ran away, the 911 operator immediately sensed something was off. Sarah claimed that B had messaged her, saying she was staying with her ex-boyfriend, Luke, but oddly, neither Sarah nor Scott had bothered to contact Luke directly or visit him to confirm B's whereabouts. That alone raised major red flags. Still, investigators sprang into action. Search efforts were launched across Peterborough and nearby areas. But despite their efforts, there was no trace of B. As the investigation progressed, detectives took a closer look at Sarah and Scott's phone records. And that's when the facade started to fall apart. First, Scott's phone activity on July 18th, the day B vanished, was suspicious. After picking B up from his parents' home around 10:25 a.m., his phone was switched off from 11:23 a.m. until 12:54 p.m. That blackout period lasted over an hour and a half. It was a crucial window of time. Even more telling, phone data showed that both Scott and Sarah made repeated trips to a lock-up garage in Walton owned by Scott's parents. Not just before B was reported missing, but several times afterward. In fact, Scott even stopped by the garage on the very same day he was supposed to bring B home. Police quickly obtained a warrant and searched the garage. While B wasn't there, they discovered something chilling: her backpack. Inside it was something that brought the entire case into sharper focus: B's personal diary. She had been writing in it since childhood, but one particular entry stunned detectives. These weren't just words, they were a desperate cry for help, a cry that no one heard. Still, the investigation continued. Detectives spoke to B's friends, hoping to learn more about her relationship with Scott. One friend, Warren, revealed that B had told him about the abuse, but on July 19th, just a day after she supposedly ran away, Warren received an odd message from B's Instagram account saying she had made it all up. That didn't make sense. B's phone had been taken away by Scott on the way to his parents' house. She never had it back. So how could she be sending texts and DMs? The answer was as disturbing as it was clear. She wasn't. Investigators discovered that the messages being sent to B's friends and to Sarah herself were all coming from B's phone. But B wasn't the one writing them. It was Sarah. Police believe that after B confided in her mother about the abuse, Scott became enraged. On the drive home from his parents' house, something happened. Scott, fearing exposure and the consequences of B revealing the truth, may have lashed out violently. Investigators suspect that during that 91-minute period when his phone was off, Scott took B's life and disposed of her body somewhere far from home. The first call Scott made after turning his phone back on was to Sarah. That call lasted 9 minutes. No one knows exactly what was said, but police suspect it was the beginning of their plan to cover up B's disappearance. Sarah, heartbreakingly, played along. She started sending fake messages from B's phone to create the illusion that B was still alive and in touch. The hope was to buy time, to sell the lie that B had simply run away. But investigators were piecing the truth together. Their findings, combined with testimony from B's friends and her brother Anthony, who had long spoken out about Scott's abusive behavior and surveillance tactics inside the home, were enough to bring charges. On September 14, 2020, both Scott Walker and Sarah Louise Walker were arrested. The charges: murder and perverting the course of justice. Despite extensive searches, B's body has never been found. And yet, the case moved forward because even without a body, the overwhelming evidence, the diary, the timeline, the phone records, the false messages, the long history of abuse painted a horrifyingly clear picture. Scott had the motive. Sarah had the means to help hide it. Together, they betrayed the one person who needed them most. The courtroom would eventually hear heart-wrenching testimonies from B's closest friends, describing how she had confided in them about the abuse she was suffering at the hands of Scott Walker. And yet, Scott stood firm in his denial, insisting he had done nothing wrong. When questioned about the surveillance cameras, including the one in the family bathroom, Scott stuck to his outlandish excuse that the cameras were only there to catch B hiding candy. But with everything we now know, the true reason for those cameras feels sickeningly obvious. One piece of disturbing evidence came from social media. At one point, Bee updated her relationship status on Facebook to show she was dating Luke. While the post itself was harmless, a comment underneath it was anything but. It was from Scott. He wrote, "Any boy who kisses you better have the image of me in your head." And he attached a black and white photo of himself. Reading those words today makes your stomach turn. Still, even with evidence stacking up, Scott kept insisting Bee had simply fled from the car that day. He never wavered in that version of events. Sarah, meanwhile, was somewhat more cooperative with the investigation. She admitted to sending text messages from Bee's phone, pretending to be her. But those messages were easy to see through. They lacked Bee's tone, her spirit, her way of expressing herself. The most jarring part was when Bee supposedly retracted her abuse claims in a message. It was out of character and transparently fake. No one who knew her believes she wrote it. Combined with the suspicious delay in reporting Bee missing and the inconsistencies in both Scott and Sarah's stories, police built a strong case. Even though Bee's body was never found, and there was no direct physical evidence of a murder, the emotional and circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. In 2021, nearly a year after Bee vanished, the jury at Cambridge Crown Court delivered its verdict. Scott Walker was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. One factor that weighed heavily in his sentencing was his refusal to disclose what happened to Bee's body. This was significant under the recently enacted Prisoners' Disclosure of Information About Victims Act, more commonly known as Helen's Law. Passed in 2020, this law prevents convicted murderers from being eligible for parole if they refuse to reveal the location of their victims' remains. Scott's silence kept Bee's family in torment. Sarah also faced her day in court. While prosecutors couldn't prove she was involved in Bee's death, she was convicted of perverting the course of justice, the same charge Scott faced in addition to murder. For her role in the deception, Sarah was sentenced to 6 years in prison. As of now, Bee's remains have still not been found. Authorities conducted extensive searches using drones, cadaver dogs, and specialized equipment, but nothing has turned up. The absence of a body continues to haunt everyone who loved her. Bee's brother Anthony remained vocal throughout the investigation and trial. He has fought tirelessly to uncover the truth and to get justice for his sister. More than anything, he wants to lay her to rest. But on December 22, 2023, something unexpected happened. Scott Walker died at prison at the age of 53. There was no fanfare, no final confession, just silence. And with him, the final piece of truth may have vanished forever. Whether it was a desire to maintain control or simply a last cruel act, Scott never revealed where Bee's body was hidden. Even in death, he denied her family the closure they so desperately needed. Bee was a gifted young woman, a passionate photographer, a dreamer, someone who believed in the good in people, even the ones who betrayed her. She respected the man who would ultimately destroy her. She had so much life ahead of her. And now we're left with heartbreak, with rage, with questions that may never be answered. Sarah is expected to be released from prison in 2027. As for the 9 other children she brought into this world, no one can say how they've coped or what their future holds. One can only hope that Sarah has used her time behind bars to reflect and change. But honestly, it's hard to imagine redemption for someone who failed their daughter so completely. If you are someone who suspects something isn't right in someone else's home, speak up. You never know how much of a difference your voice could make. Because Bee deserved so much more. She deserved to grow up, to chase her dreams, to live her life. As the shadows grow deeper, prepare yourself for another chilling tale. Christmas morning at the Wallace home was unusually quiet. Neighbors were used to the usual household sounds. The laughter of loved ones, the hum of daily chores, muffled conversations. But that day, an eerie silence hung behind the closed door. When emergency responders arrived at the scene, William Wallace met them at the door. He spoke calmly, insisting that a tragic accident had occurred. But from the very first moments, The scene inside the apartment didn't match his words. The sequence of events didn't add up, and the atmosphere felt tense. At first, it seemed like a heartbreaking domestic tragedy. But as the investigation progressed, it became clear. Something far more disturbing had happened behind those closed doors. Zezel Dominique Preston was born on September 5, 1985, in Anaheim, California. She grew up in a large family, raised by her mother, who single-handedly cared for 5 children. Zezel never knew her father. He was never part of her life. The home she grew up in was always filled with energy, the constant noise and chaos that came with having 4 brothers. But despite the challenges, her mother always did everything she could to provide for them. From an early age, Zezel showed a passion for creativity. She loved to draw, spending hours sketching and bringing her ideas to life on paper. Her interest in the arts wasn't limited to painting. She loved to dance, easily picking up choreography and dreaming of one day performing on stage. Music also played a huge role in her life. She taught herself to play the piano by ear and seriously considered pursuing a career in the field. She eagerly took part in school plays and creative competitions, hoping that one day her passion would become her profession. Teenage years brought new emotions into her life. At 16, Zezel fell in love for the first time. Romantic walks, late-night conversations, a first love that felt like it would last forever. She believed her future would be bright, filled with love and happiness. But reality had other plans. At 17, she found out she was expecting. The news changed everything. The father of the child refused to take responsibility and disappeared, leaving her to face this new reality alone. The realization that she would have to take on this journey by herself could have broken anyone. But Zezel refused to let herself fall into despair. She faced her situation with determination, fully committed to being the best mother she could be. After finishing high school, she started working, taking on any job she could find. During the day, she worked at a cafe. In the evenings, she picked up shifts at a clothing store. And at night, she tried to learn new skills, hoping for a better future. Eventually, she taught herself makeup artistry and began working as a freelance makeup artist, taking on clients whenever she could. After years of hard work, Zezel finally managed to provide a stable life for herself and her daughter. It wasn't luxurious, but it was steady. She found a way to balance work, raising her little girl, and even making time for friends. She refused to dwell on hardships, always trying to stay positive. But life had yet another challenge in store for her. At 22, Zezel found out she was expecting again. The story repeated itself. The father of the child chose not to take responsibility and disappeared, just like before. Now, she faced an even tougher reality, raising 2 little ones on her own. But she didn't back down. She worked even harder, pushing herself through exhausting shifts to make sure her family had everything they needed. Despite the constant struggle to build a better life, Zezel never felt truly alone. Her friends stood by her side, offering support when she needed it most. She remained upbeat, full of energy, and never lost faith in the future. But soon, everything was about to change. She was about to meet the man who would become her worst nightmare. In 2008, a new man entered Zezel's life, William Wallace. He was 26 years old, and at first glance, seemed confident and self-sufficient. He spoke about his difficult childhood, how he grew up without parents, and had to learn to rely on himself from an early age. There was something in his words that made people sympathize with him. He had a way of being persuasive, presenting himself as strong and determined, someone who had faced hardships but never let them break him. His past seemed dark, but the way he spoke about it made it sound like he had overcome it and become a better person. Zezel was drawn to his persistence. He showered her with attention, made thoughtful gestures, and always found ways to show her how much she meant to him. Their relationship moved quickly. She liked how confident he was, how he seemed to know exactly what he wanted. At the time, nothing about him raised concerns. On the contrary, he was charming, attentive, and knew how to make a woman feel special. She believed she had finally found someone ready to take on responsibility, someone she could rely on. As time passed, their relationship took the next step. They moved in together. After spending more and more nights at her place, William eventually moved in for good. Along with him, Zazel's 2 young daughters from her previous relationship shared the apartment. However, as their relationship progressed, unsettling signs began to emerge. At first, it was small things. He would get irritated if she spent time with others, or he would show displeasure if someone else had too much of her attention. He would jokingly criticize her appearance, casually mentioning that he didn't like certain outfits. At first, it seemed like he was just being protective. But over time, it became clear that beneath it all was a desire to control her. William demanded that she always tell him where she was and who she was with. He called her multiple times a day, even when he knew she was at work. If Zazel was late, he would immediately become suspicious, accusing her of being disrespectful toward him. When she tried to explain that she needed personal space, he acted offended, saying she was ungrateful and that other women would appreciate the kind of attention he gave her. He refused to let her have any independence, and when she pushed back, he either turned it into a joke or made her feel like she was overreacting. Before long, his jealousy escalated into aggression. One day, William lashed out at her for simply speaking to a male coworker. He accused her of flirting, of not valuing their relationship. He raised his voice, insisting that he knew how women behaved and that she needed to respect his feelings. The real nightmare unfolded in the summer of 2008. One evening, William came home in a rage. The reason: Zazel had stayed out a little later than usual after meeting up with her friends. He didn't let her explain, didn't listen to a word she said, and the tense conversation quickly turned into something much worse. Without warning, he grabbed her by the neck and started choking her. His grip was so strong that her vision blurred. She struggled to break free, but he didn't loosen his hold until she was nearly out of strength. Then, consumed by anger, he threw her against the wall with such force that her head hit the hard surface. A sharp pain shot through her body. Zazel collapsed onto the floor, her ears ringing, her breathing shallow. For a moment, it was as if he snapped out of it and realized what he had done. He stepped back, but he didn't apologize. Instead, William coldly told her that she had brought this on herself. Zazel knew she couldn't stay with him any longer. Gathering what little strength she had left, she ran out of the apartment and knocked on a neighbor's door. When they opened it, they found her in tears, her neck red with marks, her face showing clear signs of what had just happened. With shaking hands, she dialed for emergency services. By the time officers arrived, Zazel was still in a state of shock. Inside the apartment, William had already calmed down and was trying to downplay the situation. He acted like nothing serious had happened, attempting to convince the officers that it was just a minor argument, that he never meant to hurt her. But the marks on Zazel told a different story. William was arrested on the spot. It was the first time he had faced consequences for his behavior, but the legal process was nothing short of a disappointment for Zazel. Despite the clear evidence of the attack, he was sentenced to only 19 days in jail. It felt like a cruel joke, as if her pain meant nothing. The young woman hoped this would be the end of it, that William would finally be out of her life. But it was only the beginning. After serving his sentence, William returned as if nothing had happened. He knew Zazel was shaken by the ordeal, and that regaining her trust would be difficult. But he was persistent. In the first few days after his release, he didn't pressure her. He chose a different approach. He told her he had changed, that he regretted his actions, that he was ready to start over. He promised that things would be different, that it would never happen again. But words alone weren't enough. To convince her, William turned to a more subtle form of manipulation: religion. He started talking about faith, saying that during his time in jail, he had realized the weight of his past mistakes and turned to God. He quoted the Bible, spoke about forgiveness, and insisted that anyone could change if given a second chance. He reminded her that Christ taught people to forgive and asked, "Aren't you a Christian? Don't you believe in redemption?" His words struck exactly where they needed to. Zazel was a deeply religious person who regularly attended church. She had always been taught the importance of patience and forgiveness, that a woman should stand by her partner. William used her own faith against her, convincing her that what had happened was just a mistake, a moment of weakness, but that he was a different man now. He swore that she was the only one who could help him become better, and that without her, he would be lost. Under this pressure, Zazel began to question her own choices. Her friends and family warned her not to make the same mistake again, but she struggled with doubt. William truly seemed remorseful. At first, she only listened to his words, but then she went even further. She officially dropped the protective order that had been keeping him away from her. The moment that happened, things started to spiral again. His jealousy returned almost immediately. William began setting strict rules for her, criticizing her over the smallest things. Now that he felt back in control, the pressure intensified by the day. He would lash out if she came home late from work. He insisted that she distance herself from her friends, claiming they were trying to turn her against him. At the same time, William was living a double life. He was unfaithful, but whenever Zazel started to suspect something, he twisted the situation in his favor. If her friends showed her proof of his affairs, he convinced her that they were just jealous. He told her that she should only trust him, that everyone around her wanted to destroy their relationship. He was a master manipulator, making her question things that were right in front of her. During this period, William frequently found himself in trouble. In 2009, he was arrested for possession of substances, but when he got out, he once again found a way to explain it all away. He claimed he had been wrongly accused, that the police had made a mistake, that he was just a victim of the system. He told Zazel that the world was against him, and that she was the only person who truly had his back. Between 2009 and 2011, he was arrested multiple times. Each time, he got out and came right back to Zazel, using the same words, the same promises. He was becoming more unpredictable. She tried to convince herself that he would change, but with every incident, that hope became harder to believe. She didn't realize just how deeply trapped she was in the world William had built around her. In 2011, Zazel became pregnant with William's child. The news left her with mixed emotions. On one hand, she loved her children and believed she could give them a good life. On the other, her relationship with William was becoming more dangerous. He still controlled every aspect of her life, started fights over nothing, and continued to display aggressive behavior. Her loved ones hoped that the baby would change things. Her mother and friends told her that once the child was born, William might calm down and take on the role of a responsible father. Zazel wanted to believe that, but deep down, her instincts told her otherwise. Despite everyone's expectations, the aggression didn't stop. During her pregnancy, the attacks not only continued, but became even more severe. The smallest thing could set him off. Sometimes it was jealousy without reason. Other times it was just a bad mood. He lashed out at her even when she begged him to stop, reminding him of her condition. In August 2011, one of the worst incidents occurred. William lost control once again, and Zazel was left bruised and battered. When it was over, she could barely lift herself off the floor. Unable to stay near him any longer, she stumbled out of the house, weak from the pain. She had no destination. She just needed to get as far away as possible. Sometime later, her mother arrived to check on her and found her lying on the sidewalk. Her face was covered in dried blood, her body bruised, her strength completely drained. She looked lifeless, as if she had nothing left to fight with. In that moment, her mother knew that her daughter's life was hanging by a thread. That night changed everything for Zazel. In the past, she had tried to find excuses for William, but now she saw the truth. Things had gone too far. She finally realized that love and hope meant nothing if the other person didn't want to change. In September 2011, Zazel enrolled in college. She decided to get an education and become a counselor specializing in domestic abuse cases. She made this choice despite her circumstances because she wanted to turn her life around and help other women in similar situations. At that time, she was about 6 months pregnant. Despite the challenges, she continued attending classes. William was furious about her decision. It frustrated him because he saw her education as an attempt to break free from his control. On November 7, 2011, Zazel Preston married William Wallace. She made this decision despite all the warning signs, despite the past abuse, despite the endless promises he had never kept. She believed that this step would change things, that an official marriage would bring stability and force him to act differently. Friends and family tried to stop her. They told her it was a mistake, that she was putting herself in even greater danger. Her mother, who had seen her suffer in this relationship, begged her not to go through with it. But Zazel was convinced that marriage required effort, and she had to try. To those around her, it made no sense. But to Zazel, this was her last chance. She believed that if they got married, William would finally take responsibility. That marriage would strengthen their bond and push him to be a better man for their future together. There was no grand wedding celebration. It felt more like a formality than a joyful occasion. That day, Zazel officially tied her life to the man she feared. The peace she had hoped for never came. 2 weeks after it was clear that nothing had changed, on November 24, 2011, Thanksgiving Day, William started another fight. He was irritable, on edge, and not even the holiday atmosphere could calm him down. Zazel was still recovering from childbirth, but that didn't stop William from having new outbursts of aggression. The argument that night started over something trivial. She had asked her younger brother-in-law to help her with a phone setting. William immediately accused her of disrespecting him, of not valuing him, and in front of their guests, he completely lost his temper. He was furious. He didn't care that family members were around, that it was a holiday gathering. He raised his voice, hurled accusations, and tried to make her feel like she had wronged him. This incident showed everyone exactly who he really was. But Zazel still held on to hope. She tried not to dwell on it, convincing herself that it was just nerves, just stress, that it would pass. But deep down, she already knew the truth. Things were only getting worse. On December 24, 2011, their neighbors hosted a small Christmas Eve gathering. It was a night of celebration, filled with laughter and joy. Zazel and William were there too. At first, everything seemed normal, just another holiday party where no one could have guessed that tragedy was about to unfold. As the night went on, the tension between them became more and more noticeable. William's eyes followed her every move. He watched who she talked to, how she smiled. Every little thing she did fueled his suspicions. He convinced himself that she was trying to get attention from other men. The argument started on the way home. The moment their apartment door shut behind them, his jealousy exploded. He accused her of being disrespectful, of behaving inappropriately. Words quickly turned into shouting and then into physical aggression. Zazel knew that if she didn't leave the apartment right then, things would end badly. She tried to run out the door, but he caught her before she could escape. One of their neighbors, who happened to be nearby, saw her struggling to get away, but William grabbed her by the arm and dragged her back inside. The neighbor didn't step in. No one wanted to get involved in what seemed like a private dispute. Behind closed doors, the situation escalated beyond control. William no longer held back. He grabbed his wife and threw her onto a glass table. The surface shattered beneath her, sending sharp shards cutting into her skin. He then dragged her into the bathroom, turned on the hot water, and began pouring it over her wounds. The scalding temperature made the pain unbearable. Her body burned from both the deep cuts and the boiling water. She screamed, begged him to stop, but he ignored her, continuing his torment. In the other room, their newborn son's cries echoed through the apartment. At one point, William picked up the baby, walked over to his injured wife and placed him in her lap. But she couldn't even hold him. Her body was completely unresponsive. By 2 a.m., he had lost interest. He tossed Zazzle onto the bed and went to sleep. The apartment fell into silence, broken only by the sound of the infant's cries. But his mother could no longer comfort him. She was already gone. On the morning of December 25, 2011, the Wallace home was eerily quiet. The children began to wake up, excited for Christmas morning, expecting to see their mother, as always, making the day special for them. But this year, everything was different. In the living room, only William was there to greet them. He had already moved Zazzle's body from the bed to the couch, positioning her as if she were simply resting. To hide the visible signs of the attack, he placed sunglasses over her eyes. The atmosphere in the house felt unnatural. As soon as Zazzle's daughters walked in, he told them it was time to open presents. His tone didn't betray anything unusual. He acted as if it were just a regular Christmas morning. He urged them to start unwrapping gifts. The oldest daughter noticed something was off. Her mother usually took an active role in their holiday traditions, helping them figure out which gifts belonged to whom. But this time, she just sat there, motionless, which felt strange. The girl moved closer. She called out to her mother a few times, but got no response. She reached out and touched her hand. The skin was cold. Her body didn't move, didn't react. It didn't feel like she was asleep. She kept calling for her, hoping she would wake up, but nothing happened. At that moment, William stepped in. He told the girls that their mother was just exhausted, that she had too much to drink the night before, and that she needed time to recover. He ordered them to keep opening presents and to let her rest. Sometime later, William started making phone calls to Zazzle's relatives. He told them that they had an argument the night before, and she had supposedly fallen and hit her head. However, despite the clear signs that something was wrong, he didn't call for medical help right away. At least 30 minutes passed before he finally dialed emergency services. By then, it was obvious that Zazzle was unresponsive. When paramedics and law enforcement arrived at the scene, they immediately found the situation suspicious. William met them at the door, trying to explain what had happened. He claimed that Zazzle had too much to drink the night before. They had a minor argument, and she had lost her balance, hit her head, and gone to sleep. According to him, he only realized something was wrong when she didn't wake up in the morning. But the scene inside the apartment didn't match his story. There was blood throughout the room, on the floor, walls, and furniture. The amount of it was far too much for a simple fall. Investigators immediately had doubts. When they approached the couch where Zazzle was seated, it became clear that someone had deliberately altered the scene after her passing. She had been carefully positioned, sunglasses placed over her eyes. Her clothes were clean, despite the visible traces of blood around the apartment. It was evident that she had been changed after the fact, something that didn't align with the accidental fall William described. Paramedics examined her and confirmed that she was no longer alive. Officers began questioning witnesses and analyzing the apartment. Broken glass was scattered on the floor, and there were signs of a struggle. Everything pointed to a violent encounter. Zazzle's body was sent for forensic examination. Medical experts determined that she had died from a traumatic brain injury. The force of the impact had caused internal bleeding. Multiple bruises and deep cuts were also documented. These injuries weren't consistent with a simple fall. They clearly indicated a brutal attack. Based on these findings, law enforcement made the decision to arrest William Wallace. When he was informed of the charges, he immediately denied any wrongdoing. He insisted that Zazzle was responsible for what happened, that she had fallen and suffered fatal injuries on her own. Despite his claims, the evidence told a different story. The investigation had only just begun, but law enforcement already understood that this was not an accident, it was a crime, and William would have to answer for it. After William Wallace's arrest, the case remained under investigation, but the legal proceedings dragged on for years. Despite the strong evidence, the case did not move as quickly as Zazel's loved ones had hoped. The trial was delayed for nearly 9 years, and throughout this time, the accused remained in custody. The key witness in the case was Zazel's oldest daughter. She was only 8 years old at the time of the tragedy, and was the only person who could provide details about what had happened that night. However, her testimony was inconsistent. Due to her young age and the trauma she had endured, her recollections changed over time. The first interviews were conducted shortly after the incident, but with each retelling, her words varied slightly. She was afraid to speak, felt immense emotional pressure, and struggled to accurately express what she had seen. This made the prosecution's work more difficult. Investigators knew she had suffered a significant emotional wound. They did not rush her to testify. But as time passed, the trial remained at a standstill. Years went by, and the girl grew up, realizing that her words could be crucial to the case. She was still afraid to relive that night, but at some point, she understood that she needed to speak for her mother's sake. In 2021, at 17 years old, she made the decision to testify in court. Her account became one of the most critical pieces of evidence against William. She described in detail what had happened that night, how her mother had suffered, how she had personally witnessed the violence, and how her stepfather had tried to cover up the truth. She recalled hearing her mother scream in pain as boiling water burned her wounds, and how later that night she no longer moved. Her words became a turning point in the trial. Bravery finally helped push the case forward. The legal battle over Zazel Preston's death had lasted nearly a decade, but it wasn't until 2021 that it reached its final stage. Defense attorneys attempted to convince the jury that it had been an accident, but the forensic evidence proved otherwise. Medical examiners confirmed that Zazel had died from a severe traumatic brain injury, and that the nature of her wounds indicated repeated blows. After lengthy deliberations, the jury found William Wallace guilty of second-degree murder and domestic abuse. The court sentenced him to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. During the trial, Zazel's family and friends spoke about how the pressure from those around her, including members of her religious community, had influenced her decision to stay in. They recalled how church leaders had advised her to be patient, to submit to her husband, and to keep the family together for the sake of her children. Later, among Zazel's personal belongings, her diary was found. In it, she had written about the abuse she had endured for years. She described her fear, her hope that things would get better, and how she had convinced herself that, with time, William would change. These entries provided a heartbreaking confirmation of just how deeply she had been trapped in the cycle of control. When religious leaders were asked about the advice they had given Zazel, one of them stated that he had always followed the principles of family unity, teaching her about patience and harmony. He expressed sorrow over what had happened, but did not acknowledge that his words might have influenced her decision to stay. The trial came to an end, but those who knew Zazel understood that no verdict could ever bring her back. Her story became a tragic reminder of how dangerous it can be to believe that an abuser will change, if only they are loved and forgiven enough. As the shadows grow deeper, prepare yourself for another chilling tale. Human life is a precious gift, something that can never be bought or restored. Unfortunately, the true weight of this realization often comes with age. Yet some people see life as something they can put a price on, taking it without hesitation in pursuit of quick and reckless gain. The story of a young girl named Sofia Martinez sent shockwaves through the quiet city of El Paso, and soon after, the entire nation. She went to a party and then vanished without a trace. Later, the horrifying truth would leave everyone in disbelief. Sofia Maria Martinez was born on November 14, 1981 in El Paso, Texas. She was the middle of 3 daughters in the family of Juan and Lourdes Martinez. Her parents had immigrated to the United States from Mexico in the late 1970s, searching for a better life. They worked multiple jobs to provide their daughters with everything they needed. Sofia was raised alongside her 2 sisters, older sister Dulcinea and younger sister Marianne. The girls were always close, forming a strong bond from an early age. When Sophia turned 12, tensions in the family became apparent, and in 1995, her parents divorced. The sisters stayed with their mother, who later remarried a successful man named Eladio Lucio and had 2 sons with him. One also started a new family shortly after, and over time, his contact with his daughters from his first marriage became less frequent. Sophia never held resentment toward her father, and she formed a wonderful relationship with her stepmother. She grew up to be kind, outgoing, and compassionate, often helping her mother with the younger children and becoming a true support system for them. She shared a deep bond with her younger sister, and they were best friends. At 15, Martinez started working part-time as a sales associate at a local mall, saving up a considerable amount of money over the years. She had always dreamed of owning a car, specifically a bright red sports Pontiac. Her mother and stepfather knew about her dream, so when she turned 18, they gifted her the remaining amount she needed to buy it. In November 1999, Sophia finally drove her brand new car off the dealership lot, a car she had admired for so long. She took great care of it, keeping both the interior and exterior spotless and driving cautiously. The car was pride, and she never let anyone else drive it. By 2000, Martinez was preparing for graduation. She was excited for the upcoming senior prom, carefully selecting the perfect dress, shoes, and accessories. She and her sisters spent weekends shopping, trying on different outfits, planning hairstyles, and choosing the right makeup for the big night. In February, senior yearbook photos were taken, where students posed in traditional graduation caps and gowns. Sophia was beaming with happiness, eagerly looking forward to starting college. She had already set her sights on continuing her education at the prestigious University of Texas, where she planned to major in history with the goal of becoming a teacher. But tragically, her dreams would never come true. Sophia had always been surrounded by friends, but she had never been in a serious relationship. She prioritized school and work over dating, and while she occasionally accepted invitations from young men interested in her, none of those encounters turned into anything meaningful. In early March, her co-worker Justin, who worked with her at the mall, suggested setting her up on a blind date with a good friend of his. After some hesitation, she agreed, and they scheduled the date for the evening of Friday, March 10th. They chose a popular nightclub in town, one of the few venues that allowed entry to those 18 and older, unlike most places that required patrons to be 21. On the evening of March 10th, 2010, Sophia rushed home after school, eager to get ready for her blind date. She tried on at least 10 different outfits, stepping out each time to hear her family's opinions. In the end, they all agreed that she looked best in a bright red evening dress. It flattered her figure while remaining elegant and not overly revealing. She applied makeup, styled her hair into soft curls, slipped on a pair of heels, and grabbed a small clutch bag. The final touch was her favorite perfume, a scent she absolutely loved. By 10 o'clock, she was fully ready. She stepped into the living room in full glam, giving one last twirl to show off her look. Her family was in awe, certain that Sophia could win over any guy. She, in turn, promised to be home by no later than 2 in the morning, since she had a scheduled work shift at the mall on Saturday. No one was particularly worried. She was responsible and always kept her word. At 10:10 p.m., with a bright smile, Sophia left the house, slid behind the wheel of her beloved red Pontiac, and waved to her family watching from the window. None of them could have imagined that this would be the last time they saw her alive. The next morning, her younger sister, Marianne, peeked into her room and immediately noticed something strange. Sophia wasn't there, and her bed wasn't just neatly made. It looked untouched. It seemed like she had already left for work, but her employee badge was still sitting on the vanity, and her usual work shoes were in the corner by the closet. Marianne told their mother, and at that moment, the phone rang. It was Sophia's employer, calling to report that she had never shown up for her shift, something that had never happened before. Now, her family was truly alarmed and unsure of what to do next. Sophia didn't have a cell phone, which wasn't unusual at the time, so her family started calling landlines of friends, classmates, and coworkers, but no one had seen her since the night before, and they didn't have the number of the guys she was supposed to meet. They also called local hospitals, fearing she might have been in a car accident. By the evening, with no information on her whereabouts, Lourdes went to the police to report her daughter missing. She brought a recent photo of Sophia and gave a detailed description of what she had been wearing when she left home. She also provided full details about the car she was driving. The chilling discovery in the desert. On Saturday, March 11th, in the neighboring state of New Mexico, a red Pontiac was found abandoned about 100 yards off the highway that connected the two states. The passenger side window had a bullet hole, and inside the car, on the seat, steering wheel, and headrest, were dark, dried stains resembling blood. Experienced officers immediately suspected that a crime had taken place and that the driver was either seriously injured or worse. The vehicle was taken to a forensic lab for examination. However, since the discovery happened in another state, law enforcement had no immediate connection between the car and the missing girl from Texas. After checking the vehicle's registration, authorities confirmed that the red Pontiac belonged to Lourdes Martinez Lucio from Texas. They contacted her to determine whether the car had been stolen, only to learn that it had been driven by her daughter, who had been reported missing the day before. No one could understand how Sophia's car had ended up abandoned in the desert of a neighboring state, or where she might have gone. Lourdes insisted that her daughter deeply valued her car and would never abandon it, which meant something must have happened. One theory was that the vehicle had been hijacked and that Sophia may have been injured, but there was still hope that she could be found alive. However, with no immediate leads, law enforcement was left uncertain about where to even begin their search. The next day, on Sunday, March 12th, a group of teenagers walking near the outskirts of El Paso noticed something bright in the desert and decided to take a closer look. As they approached, they discovered the lifeless body of a young woman in a red evening dress. They immediately ran home to inform their parents, who then contacted the police. Within an hour, forensic investigators arrived at the scene. Officers found the young woman lying on her back, her face so badly disfigured that she was unrecognizable. Her dress was soaked in blood and covered in sand. Although no identification was found, police were nearly certain that they had just discovered the body of the missing girl from 2 days earlier. When the Martinez family was notified that a body had been found in the desert, Lourdes refused to believe it. She was convinced that there had been a mistake, that her daughter was still alive. But all doubts vanished when detectives showed her a photograph that had been recovered from the victim's bra, a picture of Sophia holding her youngest brother. Sophia was known to carry photos of her younger siblings in her wallet, but in her final moments, she had placed one close to her heart. Autopsy results and search for evidence. The autopsy revealed that the cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds to the head. She had been shot 5 times in the face, with one bullet passing through and later being recovered from the sand at the crime scene. The extent of the injuries left her with no chance of survival. In addition to the gunshot wounds, the body showed clear signs of a struggle, severe bruising, and further evidence of physical aggression. The inner surfaces of her thighs were covered in abrasions and bruises, and forensic examination confirmed internal injuries consistent with an assault. DNA analysis also uncovered biological evidence. Defensive wounds on her hands indicated that she had fought desperately for her life, but she had been overpowered. None of her personal belongings were found with her, except for the photograph tucked inside her clothing. Due to the extent of the injuries, DNA testing was required to confirm her identity, as even dental records were of no use. Toxicology reports later confirmed that she had no substances in her system at the time of her death. Near the body, investigators discovered multiple shoe prints, most of them blurred, but one clear impression allowed forensic analysts to determine the size and tread pattern of the sole. Inside the car, authorities found no fingerprints except those belonging to Sophia herself. Her purse was also recovered from the vehicle, but her license, keys, and cash had been taken by the perpetrator. The Martinez family was advised to change their door locks and install a security system, as Sofia's killer had access to her home address from her identification and possessed her keys. Her loved ones followed the recommendations, but they lived in fear, knowing that the person responsible for her death could still be out there and might target someone else. DNA samples obtained from the biological evidence left behind by the attacker were uploaded into the National Criminal Database, but no matches were found. This suggested that the perpetrator had no prior record, making the investigation even more challenging. Authorities also considered the possibility that the suspect was a transient offender, someone who had illegally crossed the border from Mexico, committed the crime, and then fled back, making it even harder to track him down. The first suspects and a crucial lead when investigators learned that Sofia had gone on a blind date the night she disappeared, arranged by a coworker. They immediately sought to question both men involved. Since her family didn't have their contact information, officers went to her workplace at the mall. Justin, the coworker who had set up the date, was on shift that day and agreed to go to the station for questioning. The second man, Marcus, was also brought in for an interview. He explained that he had agreed to meet Sofia at the club, but that she never showed up. The two men had waited for her until around midnight before leaving. Justin only found out that Sofia had gone missing the next day when she didn't show up for work. Both men willingly took polygraph tests to verify their statements, provided DNA samples, and handed over the shoes they had worn that night. The results showed no connection to the crime. Their alibis were solid, as dozens of people had seen them at the club. During a more thorough inspection of Sofia's car, officers found a crumpled ATM receipt that had fallen under the driver's seat. The timestamp showed that at 10:23 p.m., she had withdrawn $20 from an ATM just a few blocks from her home. This became a significant lead because the area had surveillance cameras at the ATM and on surrounding buildings. The final moments caught on camera. Investigators reviewed footage from all available cameras, and what they saw was shocking. The crime had been captured from multiple angles, allowing authorities to piece together what had happened. At 10:22 p.m., a red Pontiac pulled up to the ATM. The driver's side window rolled down, and a young woman withdrew $20 from her account. The footage clearly showed that she was alone in the car. After taking the cash, Sofia lingered for a moment, using her compact mirror to touch up her lipstick. At that moment, a figure dressed entirely in black, with a hood pulled over his head, crept up behind the car. Sofia didn't notice him until he was already at her window. Without hesitation, he pulled out a firearm and shot her in the head. But he hadn't intended to end her life, only to wound and intimidate her. The bullet grazed her cheek, clipped her nose, and exited through the passenger side window. A moment later, the injured Sofia, holding a tissue to her bleeding face, withdrew an additional $200 from her account. The car then began to pull away from the ATM, with the assailant now inside, holding the weapon to the back of her head. Within seconds, the vehicle disappeared from the camera's view, and what happened next remained unknown. It's important to remember that this occurred in the early 2000s, when surveillance camera quality was far from what it is today. The footage was grainy and lacked detail, making it impossible to create a composite sketch of the suspect. All that could be determined was that the attacker was a white male of average height and slim build, possibly with facial hair. This information, along with clips of the attack, was broadcast on local television, warning residents of the danger and asking anyone who recognized the suspect to come forward. A long and frustrating investigation. Following the news segment, police received dozens of calls, but none provided any useful leads. As time passed, the investigation stalled. No new evidence emerged, and authorities were left with more questions than answers. At the end of March, a man contacted the police, stating that he had found a driver's license near the location where Sofia's body had been discovered 2 weeks earlier. The document belonged to a local woman, and authorities feared she might have met the same fate. However, Upon reaching out to her, they found that she was safe and unharmed. When officers arrived at her home, she explained that her purse had been stolen earlier that month at a shopping mall, the same mall where Sophia had worked. Investigators speculated that the perpetrator might have been stalking potential victims before attacking, and shared this information with the media to warn other women. However, the very next day, a young man turned himself in, admitting that he was the one who had stolen the purse. After seeing the news report, he panicked, fearing that police would connect him to a crime he hadn't committed. He voluntarily provided a DNA sample and was ruled out as a suspect in Sophia's case. By July 2000, the investigation had reached a standstill. In an effort to generate new leads, authorities offered a $10,000 reward for any information leading to the killer's capture. Soon after, the Martinez family launched a fundraising campaign to increase the amount. Their efforts were supported not only by friends and concerned citizens, but also by local organizations. By August, the reward had grown to $55,000. Despite these efforts, 6 months had passed since the tragedy, and no new leads had emerged. Even a feature on America's Most Wanted failed to produce any significant breakthroughs, a sudden twist, and the first real lead. On September 30th, 2000, a young woman called the police, claiming she knew who had taken Sophia's life and was willing to provide details in exchange for the reward money. While false tipsters seeking financial gain had come forward before, this time, the witness claimed to have physical evidence. The caller was Heather Napowaski, a 20-year-old mother of 2. According to her, the crime had been committed by her boyfriend, Michael Jock, and their mutual friend, William Berkeley. As proof, she handed over a severely burned driver's license belonging to Sophia Martinez. Heather stated that she had been too afraid to speak out earlier, fearing retaliation. But with Michael recently incarcerated and no way to support her children, she had decided to come forward, both to help the investigation and to secure the reward. Heather told detectives that in early March, she had been hospitalized due to kidney complications. At the time, William was temporarily staying with her and Michael. All three were unemployed and struggling financially. On March 10th, William visited the hospital and pulled Michael aside for a private conversation. Heather overheard parts of their discussion and realized they were planning something illegal, but she assumed it was related to selling prohibited substances, which they had been involved in before. She didn't question them further. Shortly after, both men left, taking a box of latex gloves from a medical supply cabinet. Later that night, around 11 p.m., Michael returned to Heather's hospital room and told her they had managed to get some money. According to Jacques, he had hidden near an ATM and signaled to William when a lone driver pulled up. Once the money was withdrawn, William allegedly approached the vehicle, threatened the driver with a firearm, took the cash, and ordered them to step out of the car. He then got behind the wheel and drove off. Even at this point, detectives knew this version of events didn't align with the actual crime. But for now, they let Heather continue her story. After midnight, a nurse entered the hospital room and told Michael that someone was waiting for him downstairs. It was William who said they needed to get rid of the car. The two men left in separate vehicles, drove to the neighboring state, abandoned the Pontiac in the desert, and then returned home in Jacques' car. A day later, Heather was discharged from the hospital. She was anxious, wondering whether the injured person would report the crime to the police. To calm her down, Berkeley showed her a driver's license belonging to Sophia Martinez, pointing out that it contained her home address. He casually remarked that if necessary, the victim could be intimidated into staying silent. Then, without hesitation, he tossed the license into a smoldering grill and watched indifferently as it melted before heading off to bed. A few days later, when Heather saw the news report about Sophia's case, everything clicked. She immediately recognized Berkeley on the ATM surveillance footage. She also realized why he had suddenly changed his appearance, shaving off his beard and cutting his hair down to the scalp. When she confronted Michael about his involvement, he ordered her to stay quiet. Heather retrieved the burned license from the grill and kept it hidden. She also noticed that Michael had a set of car keys with a Pontiac logo keychain, though she didn't know what became of them. In August, Berkeley moved out of their home, and in September, Michael was arrested on charges related to distributing prohibited substances. Only then, feeling safer, Heather decided to tell the truth and make some money in the process. Following Heather's statement, investigators immediately brought in 23-year-old Michael Jock for questioning. Surprisingly, he didn't deny involvement and agreed to share his side of the story. According to him, he had nothing to do with Sophia's death, but admitted to helping his friend cover up the crime. Michael stated that both he and William were desperate for cash and decided to rob someone at an ATM. When the red Pontiac pulled into the parking lot, Jacques saw that the driver was a young girl and attempted to call off the plan. However, his partner misinterpreted the signal as a go-ahead. Michael was aware that William had a firearm, but claimed he never imagined he would actually use it. The situation escalated within seconds, and before he knew it, the car had sped off into the night. He waited for about half an hour, but when William didn't return, he went back to the hospital to be with Heather. He insisted that he had no idea what had happened to Sophia after that, and denied knowing about the assault and the killing. However, he admitted to helping dispose of the car. He later learned more details, but chose not to turn his friend in, knowing he would also face consequences. One of the key pieces of evidence, a set of car keys, was later found on the roof of Jacques' house, exactly where he had thrown them. The primary suspect, 20-year-old William Berkeley, was arrested in early October at his parents' home. He had no prior criminal record, but those who knew him described a long history of aggression and cruelty. Since his school years, he had physically attacked classmates, former girlfriends, and even his own mother, yet none of them had ever filed a police report. At the same time, he was exceptionally talented, creating artwork that had even been displayed in galleries. During his initial interrogation, Berkeley avoided details but admitted to robbing Sophia, claiming he needed money. However, when questioned about the assault, he insisted that the encounter had been consensual and that he had accidentally shot her afterward. In later interrogations, once he realized the gravity of the situation, Berkeley began changing his story. He now portrayed himself as a victim, claiming he was merely carrying out a scheme orchestrated by Michael. According to him, it was Jacques who had chosen the car, assuming that the owner of a Pontiac would have a sizable amount of money in her account. However, to their disappointment, Sophia only had $220, an amount that, in their eyes, became the price of her life. The trial and sentencing leading up to the trial, the former friends desperately tried to shift the blame onto each other, but the evidence against Berkeley was overwhelming. During a search of his home, authorities recovered the murder weapon, a .22 caliber handgun. His DNA was found on the victim, and in his bedroom, investigators discovered a pair of sneakers that perfectly matched the footprints left at the crime scene. On April 7, 2002, Berkeley was convicted on all charges and sentenced to death by lethal injection. The sentence was carried out in the spring of 2010. Throughout the years leading up to his execution, he never showed remorse for his actions. On November 3, 2002, Michael Jock was also found guilty of conspiracy to commit a crime and evidence tampering. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 40 years. As for Heather, she received the promised $55,000 reward, but the money brought her no happiness. She lost custody of her children, and at the age of 35, she passed away due to complications from a chronic kidney condition.